Donald Trump on Truth Social, Major League Baseball, didn't have the courage or decency to put the late, great Pete Rose, also known as Charlie Hustle, into the Baseball Hall of Fame. Now he is dead. Will never experience the thrill of being selected, even though he was a far better player than most of those who made it and can only be named posthumously. What a shame. Anyway, over the next few weeks, I will be signing a complete pardon of Pete Rose, who shouldn't have been gambling on baseball, but only bet on his team winning. He never betted against himself or the other team. He had the most hits by far in baseball history and won more games than anyone in sports history. Baseball, which is dying all over the place, should get off its fat, lazy ass and elect Pete Rose, even though it's far too late, into the Baseball Hall of Fame. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. There is something very American about that. There's something very American about Pete Rose in general. He just seemed like an all-American baseball player, played hard, lived hard, made some mistakes, as we all do. And Donald Trump is reflective of that same kind of persona in many ways. And so it seemed oddly appropriate that Trump would do that. And then I saw in some of the coverage of Trump's comments, something I found a little interesting. And Rob Manfred considering petition to remove Pete Rose from MLB's ineligible list. Less than 24 hours after President Trump said he planned to issue a complete pardon of Pete Rose over the next few weeks, ESPN reported that MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred is considering a petition filed by the family of 17-time All-Star in January that requested him to be removed from the sports ineligible list. According to ESPN, Jeffrey Lenkov, the lawyer, filed a petition after he and Rose's daughter Fawn met with Manfred at the end of last year. So the petition had been filed a few weeks ago. And I'm thinking, okay, so the petition came out. Trump knows about the petition, maybe or maybe not. But he certainly knew about it by the time he posted on Truth Social, one would think. He didn't just bring Pete Rose up out of nowhere. Do you think Pete Rose is going to be taken off the ineligible list? I would suspect that Pete Rose will absolutely be taken off the ineligible list. I would also suspect that Donald Trump knew that before Friday evening, or maybe he just heard on Friday, is what I'm saying. At the point at which he finds out this thing is going to happen, or maybe he talked to Manfred and applied some pressure, whatever it was, I would assume that Donald Trump had foreknowledge of that, and that sparked his post. Now, when you look at it, it looks like, and it's going to look like to the American public, that Donald Trump was responsible for getting Pete Rose off the ineligible list. And maybe we'll find out that he actually was, but either way, he's going to be given credit for it because people will hear about Pete Rose with Trump's post. Enough people will hear about it so that if it ever comes up in conversation, someone there is probably going to know, oh yeah, Trump posted about that. In all the coverage of the Pete Rose being removed from the ineligible list story, there's going to be a note about how Donald Trump posted about it on Truth Social. I bring this up because I think it's reflective of a dynamic that we see a lot, a process that we see repeating, where Donald Trump has foreknowledge of something that's going to happen and gets himself involved in a very public way so that when the thing does happen, Donald Trump is given credit for it. And now a lot of people might then respond by saying, well, he's trying to take credit for things he's not doing. I don't know if he is or isn't, to tell you the truth. It's possible that he is. But regardless, we're in an information war. And the key would be whether or not, quote unquote, we have it all. And by we, of course, I mean Donald Trump and the people around Donald Trump. And if you have it all, you would, of course, know that things like Pete Rose being removed from the ineligible list would be happening before the public knows about them. And so in that middle time, it's a matter of whether or not Donald Trump chooses to take advantage of that knowledge. People might have an issue about something like that, morally speaking, because they might say he's taking credit for things he didn't do. On the other hand, but we're watching the implementation of this great reset agenda worldwide, and we're watching the implementation of various plans. We're watching these plans at work. And I've suggested now numerous times that it's probably not just the Great Reset plan versus the Trump plan, and that's it. There are probably a bunch of plans on that Great Reset side, all slightly different based on the different factions that are operating to push that thing forward. But underneath everything within that controlled opposition bubble, is going to be the advancement of that same agenda, more or less. Maybe different winners or losers in one plan than another, slight variations here and there, whatever. There's going to be lots of arguing and bickering. And again, that's one of the things that ends up bringing these people down because they don't actually have any faith or loyalty or true allegiance to anything but their own purposes. They can work together when their goals are aligned. When those goals diverge, then the backstabbing begins and things begin to break down. And I believe that we're seeing that process. So Trump has the plan that's working against that. I talked about this a couple of months back on the movie Days of Thunder. I talked about the concept, which is referred to as the slingshot and as drafting in this film.
No, it's just something Harry and I work on together. It's called drafting. One car tucks in behind another. Two cars can go faster than one. They divide the air resistance between them. Now here's where it gets interesting. The lead car has to floor it to hit 200 miles an hour. But the car that's tucked in behind can go just as fast and still have power in reserve. So when these two cars come off that last turn, the car that's in back can move out of the draft and slingshot past the lead car, beat it to the finish line.
I think you probably understand the concept. And I think that Donald Trump, one of the key strategies that we see in the information war that we are witnessing is that Donald Trump employs that strategy often. He knows what the enemy is going to do. Some of the things they're going to do are going to have immediate, visible impacts that people will appreciate. Now, they might be taking things in a different direction, or they might just be going straight ahead. And some of the things in that Great Reset agenda will probably make people very happy. The problem is that the agenda is ultimately anti-human, and it is designed to remove human liberty for all time, to build a society that is not the one we want at all. That doesn't mean that every element of what's going to happen, the results of some of the steps of the implementation of that agenda are all themselves bad or would be recognized as bad. And maybe that's the most important part. So when there are good things that is doing, would it then make sense to take credit for those so that people, when they experience these good effects, will understand these good effects through a lens that reflects an American ideology, a pro-American ideology, an ideology that is pro-nationalism, pro-sovereignty, pro-freedom, pro-liberty, however you want to describe it, a very pro-American ideology, so that people understand it is the American ideology that accomplishes these things, because it can be. And the good aspects of that agenda are being brought on by people's innovation, motivation, ambition, all these things that historically have driven American success forward are still in the mix, but many of these things are just heading in the wrong way. So if Donald Trump can take over a story and guide it toward these American ideologies, these pro-American ideologies, and people understand the success again and then re-embrace these ideas rather than thinking, oh, hey, everything good now is happening because of communism, and which leads them to ignore all the terrible things that are happening because of communism. I think that perhaps that is going in the direction of a win from an information war perspective. And I think that pattern might be something that we're seeing play out regularly as these situations evolve. And I think that this idea of accepting that some of these things are good and then communicating them publicly in the ways that they are reflective of an American ideology is an appropriate method to be taken. And I'll try to hammer that point home a little better so that you can kind of understand the morality here and that the credit is actually being moved to the right place and wouldn't be otherwise. For instance, let's think about the kind of tech bro libertarian ideologies. Those ideologies are totally fine with smaller government. Many of the people professing those ideologies, and we'll focus on Peter Thiel in particular, J.D. Vance's owner. Peter Thiel wrote the foreword to the most recent edition of The Sovereign Individual. The Sovereign Individual was written by globalist normies who nonetheless saw that there would be changes in society. They thought those changes were going in a certain direction. A more recent and contemporary version of that book was written 25 years ago, 26 years ago, is a man named Curtis Yarvin. And Yarvin is a brown, educated grandson of a communist who he believes helped defeat the Nazis. He is an interesting thinker, an interesting and entertaining writer, Not so much the case when he is speaking. And I encourage you to watch interviews with him. It's not all there. He just basically rambles through historical stories. He's memorized entire segments of the official story and the counter narrative official story of many historical events. And he can just rattle them off one after the other and then suggest that they mean something. And because it's history, he's like, oh, well, I'm authoritative when I make these statements on what should happen. I'm not a big fan of his. I am a big fan of neo-reactionary Nick Land, who has done a lot of analysis of Curtis Yarvin's work, and I don't think reaches all the same conclusions. I also think Land is observing something culturally and intellectually that Yarvin's not exactly in touch with, just based on their different intellectual backgrounds. But Yarvin talks about the formation of these more individualized and localized, either city-states or smaller nation states, and that society just fragments further. And that might be where we're going. I don't know if that's where we're going or not. It could be. But within his ideology, and I suspect within parts of that ideology that Peter Thiel subscribes to, he is much more freedom and liberty oriented than someone who's interested in implementing the Great Reset agenda from the left. Now, Yarvin is a materialist, and I'm pretty sure that Thiel is as well. They both seem like kind of futurist techno-Kabbalists, basically. And they have a normie understanding of history as written. And I think that those are both just conversation enders as far as I'm concerned. But within that viewpoint, there are a lot of things that we could sign up for. Okay. It's not like the entire thing is just wrong or offensive. It's that the conclusions are wrong. And so, to the extent that the techno-libertarians are driving some aspect of what this current Trump administration is, especially considering that they may not have wanted Trump to be involved anymore to begin with, well, then there are aspects of their ideology embedded in what's happening right now and embedded in that Great Reset agenda that Trump is also going to go along with. So it can be part of their agenda to remove massive chunks of the federal bureaucracy, which is a good thing, which comports with the original Constitution, but is nonetheless not part, or not ideologically so much, part of that Great Reset. It is something that will happen under either plan. And we've talked many times about how I imagine they will probably remove these agencies from the federal government, then just control them privately, fund them through global philanthropists and other globalists, technocrats, global governance, etc. And they'll do the same thing privately, wielding the same influence privately. And I am suggesting that the techno-libertarians, as part of that Great Reset agenda, would be more than happy to have those organizations run privately and not by the federal government. Our interests are aligned on the shrinking and fragmentation of the federal government. When that happens, and it's inevitable that it's happening, is Trump justified in saying, actually, you know what that is? That's not the Great Reset agenda. That is the promotion of American ideologies. And that is something that we desperately need. So he reroutes the credit for any advancement along those lines to himself and to the Make America Great Again agenda, to sovereign nationalism and sovereign nationalism worldwide.